Hello, hi. This is about the lecture number 9, K-means clustering. So in this lecture, we will talk about the clustering. So clustering is a task of partitioning the data into groups, and we don't label those groups. The groups are not labeled. The goal is to split the data such that the points within a single cluster they are similar, and points in different clusters they are different. Similar to classification algorithm, clustering algorithms assign a number to each data point, indicating that which cluster is a particular point it belongs to. So in clustering, it assigns a number to each cluster. So we talk about the k-means clustering. K-means clustering is one of the simplest and most commonly used clustering algorithm. It tries to find clusters centers that are representative of regions of the data. The algorithm alternates between two steps. One is assigning each data point to the closest center. We assign the each data point to the closest center, and then setting each cluster center as the mean of the data points. Then the cluster center is updated as the mean of those data points. So these are the 2 points. So what is that? We make the each point closest to the cluster center, and then we update the cluster center as the mean of those points. The algorithm is finished when the assignment of instances to clusters no longer changes. When the assignment to clusters no longer changes or the cluster centers no longer changes. The following example illustrates the algorithm for a synthetic dataset. So first we will install the mjlearn library as we follow in the previous lectures as well. So we install it and then we import the mjlearn library, and then we make a plot of mjlearn plot of k-means algorithm. So input data, and then it is the initialization of data where we assign the centers to 3 clusters, and then we assign the points to those 3 clusters. We begin to assign the points to these 3 clusters, and then we compute the centers of those clusters and keep updating those, reassign the points and recompute the centers, reassign the points and recompute the centers. So we keep repeating those 2 steps, reassigning the points and recomputing the centers of the clusters. So cluster centers are shown as triangles. Cluster centers are shown as a triangles. As you can see, these are the triangles are cluster centers. And data points are shown as circles. Colors indicate cluster memberships. These colors, they show the cluster membership, blue, green, and red one. We specify that we are looking for 3 clusters, so the algorithm was initialized by declaring 3 data points randomly as cluster centers. We randomly declare 3 data points as cluster centers. Then iterative algorithm starts. First, each data point is assigned to the cluster center that it is closest to. Each data point, it is assigned the cluster center it is closest to. Next, each data point is assigned the cluster center it is close to. For example, for these data points, this is the center, is the closest center. So all these points are assigned as a blue. For these points, these green points, this center is closest to. So the color of green, this center is assigned to all these points. And for these points, this center, these are the points, red points are the points which are closest to the center and therefore labeled as a red one. So first is assign the points. Next, the cluster centers are updated. After assigning the points, we update the cluster centers so that these cluster centers are in the middle of these points. So it is not in the middle, so it will move it over here, like in this figure. And then this center is not in the middle, it will be moved in the middle here, over here. And this cluster center is not in the middle, so it will be moved in the middle of these points. So this, and after recomputing the center, the shape will look like this. After that, what we'll do, we will again compute the for each point we will compute the distance from the centers. So now for these points, they are becoming closer to this center, and these points, they are becoming close to this center, and they almost there is no effect for this. So therefore now these red points, they are begin to make green. They are begin to make green because they are closer to the center. So it will look like this. And now we will again update the and these points the red points will be the same, but the we will assign we will assign the points over here. So it will look like this. Then we update the center. So we update the center. This uh, green point center will be over here. This red center will be over here, and this blue center will be over here. And in the next step, we again reassign the points, and this red point also turns to green. And the shape looks like this one, and there is almost no change in the red points. So this is the updated version of the k-means clustering, following, I guess, 3 steps: step 1, step 2, and step 3. After 3 steps, we have separated or segregated these clusters. What these steps are: the first is assigning the points to the closest center and then updating the center, assigning the points to the closest center, then updating the center. So this is all the discussion about this procedure which I have elaborated over here. So given new data points, k-means will assign to each of the closest center. It will, when we have the new data point, it will check that it is closest to which center: center to blue, center to green, or center to red. The next example shows the boundaries of the cluster centers that we have learned. So these are the individual cluster centers. But what about if the point lies over here, or point lies over here, or here in the white regions? Therefore, we have to define the cluster boundaries. So now these are the only individual clusters, but we have not defined the boundaries. So in the next step, we will define the boundaries. So now we have defined the boundaries in this stage. So we can see that if any point lies over here, it is be associated with, it will be associated with the blue clusters, and if any point lies over here, it will be associated with the green cluster. And likewise, any point here in this region will be associated with the orange or the red clusters. So k-means clustering, the scikit-learn is quite straightforward. Here we apply it to the synthetic data that we have used for proceeding the plots. We initiate the k-means cluster. We set the number of clusters we are looking for. We use the fit method in this figure. So we use the import the data set, I think synthetic data set, and k from the sklearn we import the clusters, k-mean cluster, make a blob of these, compute the k-means, and cluster classes are 3 classes, and we fit it, and it looks like this way. So I run it again. So this is the k-means cluster, and it will show the number of iterations, number of clusters, initialization, and distances, etc. During the algorithm, each training data point X is assigned a cluster label. You can find these labels in the k-means dot label. So there will be k-means dot label, and all the clusters will be in that k-means dot label. So we print the, so these are all the labels for the k-means cluster. So we can ask for the 3 clusters. As we mentioned, we have 3 clusters: 0, 1, and 2. So this is the outcome of output or result of for the 3 clusters prediction. You can also assign cluster labels to new data points using the predict method. Using the predict method, we can make this prediction for the unknown data. Each new point is assigned to the closest cluster. Each data point is assigned the closest cluster, and we run the predict k-means dot predict over X. So we find it how it looks like. So it shows the result. You can see that clustering is somewhat similar to classification. In each item, it get a label as 0, 1, 2, 3, and it is misconfused with the classification, because classification we also get the same results as a class 0, 1, 2. So here it looks like cluster 0, cluster 1, or cluster 2. Running the algorithm again might result in a different numbering of clusters because of random nature of initialization. So this is the difference, that if we run it again, that some results could change. The cluster centers are stored in the cluster centers attribute. There is a cluster center attribute, and all the cluster centers are over there. So, a cluster assignment and cluster centers found by K means three clusters. So these are the three clusters, and their centers are over here, center here, here, and this is the center. We now use more or fewer clusters. If we change the number of clusters from 3 to 2 or 5, what it would be the result. So now we make this procedure, and we change the number of clusters to 2 and change the number of clusters to 5, and see that how our output looks like. So here are our plots that now we have only two clusters. This is cluster 1 and this is cluster 2. And if we have the for other setting is for n is equal to n cluster is equal to 5. So this is the plot. It looks like it says that this is cluster 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is the result. So you can see that cluster assignment found K means using two classes and five classes. Two classes on left and five classes on right. Failure cases of k means is not it works well, but it does not work well all the times. Even you know that the right number of clusters for a given data set, k means might not work well. Each cluster is defined solely by a center, which means that the cluster is a convex shape. uh, it presumes that cluster is a convex shape, and as a result, K means cluster can only capture relatively simple shapes. If the shapes are simple, like a circle or sphere, then it can predict well the K means clustering. But if the shapes are different, we talk about them, then it does not work well. Assume that all clusters have the same diameter in some sense. It presumes that all the clusters they have the same diameter, and some of the clusters are concentrated, or some are the far away. It might not work well. It is always assumes that the boundary between clusters to be exactly in the middle between the cluster centers. That sometimes lead to surprising results. So we will talk about it. Cluster assignment found by K means when different densities, when we have the different densities, for example, we make the density of 1, density of 2.5, and density of 0.5. So now these clusters, they look like this: class 0, class 1, class 0, class 1, class 2. Class 0 is highly dense, class 1 is moderately dense, and class uh, 2 is very lightly dense. So all the points are far away from. We might have expected the dense region in the lower left to the first cluster. So say that this is cluster 1, the design region in the upper right to be the second cluster. This is second cluster, and the less dense region in the center. This is less dense region in the center is the third cluster. Inside both cluster 0 and 1 have the same points that are far away from all other points in this clusters that reach towards the center. The real points position can be seen in figure. So actual the position you can see here. And if I can see that these 2 points, they were actually from this green data set, but here it have been misclassified as to this because they are closer to this, but actually they were from here. And I guess these points was also from green, but they have been associated with the blue one because they are closer to blue one. Actually, these are the dispersed or less dense points for the class 2, but they have been mixed with the they have mixed with the class misclassified as a class 1, and these are the misclassified as class 0. So K means assumes that all directions are equally important for each cluster. The following plot shows a two-dimensional data set where there are three clearly separated parts in the data. However, these groups are stretched towards diagonal. SK means only considers the distances to the nearest cluster center. It cannot handle this kind of data. So if there is non-spherical clusters, so we see that how it works, or does it work or not. So like the data is non-spherical like this way. Now non-diagonal. So if it is like this way, so we can see that, sorry, how it works. So K means performs poorly if the clusters have more complex shapes, like two moons dataset. If we have the two moons dataset, it doesn't work well. For example, in this way. Actually, this was the class one and this was the class two, but you see that partially it has made it as a class zero and partially it has made it class one because this portion of class 2 it is near to and this cluster, and therefore it has been shown as a blue, and this portion actually belonging to class 2 is closer to this portion which is from class 1, but it is closer to this cluster center, so it has been associated with this class and this is the cluster center for blue class. So here we hope that the clustering algorithm can discover the two half moons. So here is not possible using the k-means clustering. So we have made some modification. We see that k-means is limited to the linear cluster boundaries. Fundamental model assumption for k-means clustering is that the algorithm would be ineffective if the clusters have complicated geometrical shapes. If the complicated geometrical shapes are there, the k-means clustering would not work. The boundaries between k-means cluster would always be linear, which means that it will fail for more complicated boundaries. Situation is reminiscent of the discussion that sport vector machines, where we use the kernel transformation to project the data onto high dimensional space for a better separation. So we might imagine using the same trick, and we apply that trick here. One version of kernelized k-means is implemented scikit-learn using the spectral clustering estimator. It uses the graph of nearest neighbors to compute the high dimensional representation of data. So here we use the spectral clustering, and we have some parameters. We say that there are two clusters, affinity to nearest neighbors, and assign label as k-means. So when we run it, and we see that now it fairly detects the two data sets which have the distribution like two moons, two half moons distribution. So we see that this kernel transformation approach, the kernelized k-means, is able to find more complicated nonlinear boundaries, more complicated and nonlinear boundaries between clusters. K-means is a popular, so now we get a summary of K-means clustering. K-means is a very popular algorithm for clustering, not only because it is relatively easy to understand and implement, but also because it runs relatively very quickly. One drawback of k-means clustering is that it relies on random initialization, which means that the outcome of algorithm depends on a random seed. By default, scikit-learn runs the algorithm 10 times with 10 different randomizations, and it chooses the best one. So sometimes results may vary because due to random initialization. Further downsides of k-means is relatively restrictive assumptions made on the shape of clusters. The requirement to specify the number of clusters you are looking, because each iteration of k-means clusters access every point in the dataset. Algorithm can be relatively slow because we have to compute every point and its value and its distances. You might wonder if the requirement used all the iterations will be relaxed. Okay, so this is ideas some, so therefore some uh, the solution to this is the batch-based k-means algorithm, one form which is implemented in scikit. So to reduce the to make the algorithm fast, the interface of this same standard k-means, we will see an example of this using our discussion. So it was about the k-means clustering. Next, we will talk about in the subsequent part. We will talk about examples of this k-means clustering.